There is a sacred space within every human being, a field of stillness that is untouched by thought, untouched by fear. It is in this space that love arises, not as emotion, but as a state of being. When two people meet from this space, a conscious relationship becomes possible. Most relationships are not truly relationships. They are mutual role-playing games. The mind says, I want you to complete me. And so the other becomes a means to an end, not a living presence. This is the dysfunction that turns love into pain. When presence is absent, the ego takes over. It wants control, it wants validation, it wants to be right. The ego does not seek to relate, it seeks to possess. And so what begins as attraction becomes entanglement. What begins as joy becomes struggle. But something changes when awareness enters the space between two people. Instead of reacting, you become still. Instead of demanding, you listen. Instead of needing, you allow. A conscious relationship is not one without conflict. It is one where conflict becomes a doorway, not a wall. It is one where both beings use the mirror of the other not to blame, but to awaken. The other shows you your unconsciousness, not to hurt you, but to help you become aware of it. Can you hold space for another without needing them to be different? Presence is the foundation of conscious relationships. Without presence, relationships become unconscious patterns of need, control, and projection. When two people come together without awareness, they are not truly seeing each other. They are seeing only the mental images they have constructed. These images are shaped by past experiences, fears, and expectations. In such a relationship, the other person is not experienced as they are, but through the filter of one's own conditioned mind. Presence means to be here fully, without interpretation. It is to meet the other not with judgment or agenda, but with openness and stillness. In this state, the mind is no longer trying to manipulate or protect. It is no longer seeking to get something from the other. It is simply allowing the moment to unfold as it is. This space is where true connection arises. When you are present with another, you are not relating from the past. You are not reacting based on old wounds or future fears. You are not looking for the other to complete you. You are not trying to fix them or to be fixed. Instead, there is a sense of deep acceptance of them, of yourself, and of the moment. This acceptance is not passive or indifferent. It is alive with awareness, filled with quiet aliveness. In that space, love is not something you do, it is something you become. In the absence of presence, the ego takes over. It looks at the other as an object, someone to fulfill desires, to make one feel worthy, to rescue from loneliness. The ego uses the relationship as a means to an end. When the other person fails to meet these unconscious expectations, the ego feels betrayed. It becomes resentful, defensive, or manipulative. Conflict arises, not because of the situation itself, but because of the ego's resistance to what is. Presence dissolves this resistance. It allows you to stay rooted in awareness even when emotions are triggered. It enables you to observe without immediately reacting, to listen without preparing a response, to feel without identifying with the feeling. This spaciousness brings clarity. You begin to notice how often your mind wants to label, compare, and judge. And in that noticing, you disidentify from those patterns. Presence is not something you need to strive for. It is your natural state when the noise of the mind subsides. In a conscious relationship, both individuals are committed not to changing each other, but to remaining present with whatever arises. There is an honoring of the inner stillness, even in moments of tension. There is a shared awareness that the other is not the cause of your emotional state. They are simply the trigger, revealing what already exists within you. This understanding transforms the way you relate. You no longer see the other as someone who should make you happy. You recognize that your inner state is your responsibility. From this realization, love becomes unconditional, not because you are trying to be spiritual or noble, but because you are no longer bound by unconscious need. You are no longer seeking to extract something from the other. In presence, communication changes. There is no urgency to defend or attack. Words arise from stillness, not reactivity. Even silence becomes a form of deep connection. The space between words carries more meaning than the words themselves. Eye contact is no longer about performance or dominance. It becomes a gateway to the formless essence within each person. Presence is not about being calm all the time or never having emotional responses. It is about being aware of those responses as they happen. It is about recognizing the still space beneath every thought, beneath every feeling. In this space, the other person is no longer a character in your inner drama. They are a reflection of the same consciousness that looks through your eyes. Ego seeks control, awareness allows space. The egoic mind cannot tolerate uncertainty or vulnerability, and so it creates strategies to manage the unpredictability of relationships. It wants to define, possess, and structure the other person into something fixed. This controlling tendency is not always overt. It often appears subtly through expectations, comparisons, judgments, or even silent resentment. At its core, egoic control is rooted in fear of being hurt, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough. Control arises when we believe that the other person is responsible for our emotional state. If they behave a certain way, we feel secure. If they change or act unpredictably, we feel anxious. The ego cannot sit with this discomfort, so it tries to manipulate the situation to restore a sense of safety. It uses demands, criticism, withdrawal, or emotional pressure. These behaviors are attempts to bend the relationship into something the mind can predict and manage. But what the ego achieves in control, it loses in depth. The tighter the grip, the more love slips away. A relationship that becomes a battleground of unspoken control mechanisms cannot flourish. There is no room for the other to be fully themselves. There is no room for growth, for vulnerability, for transformation. The need to control stifles the living quality of the relationship, reducing it to a transactional exchange governed by unconscious needs. Awareness, on the other hand, creates space. Space for the other to be as they are. Space for yourself to observe your own reactions. Space for the natural intelligence of life to guide the connection. Awareness does not mean passivity. It does not mean allowing dysfunction or accepting unkindness. It simply means being conscious of what is arising, both within and without immediately trying to change or fix it. When you are aware, you begin to recognize the subtle movements of the ego. You notice the tightening in your chest when your partner doesn't respond as expected. You observe the urge to say something that will elicit a certain reaction. You become aware of the thoughts that try to frame the other person as wrong or yourself as victim. In that moment of noticing, you are no longer inside the ego, you are witnessing it. That witnessing is the beginning of freedom. Awareness does not need the other person to be anything different for you to be at peace. It allows for imperfection, for uncertainty, even for discomfort. In the spaciousness of awareness, love can unfold organically, not as something manufactured by control, but as something revealed through acceptance. When both individuals in a relationship move from awareness, a natural rhythm develops. There is no longer a need to force or grasp. Communication becomes more honest, intimacy becomes deeper, because there is nothing to defend or protect. This spaciousness is not a passive emptiness. It is vibrant, alert, and alive. It holds the intensity of emotion without becoming entangled in it. It allows conflict to arise without turning it into identity. When you operate from this space, you may still have boundaries, but they are not rigid walls of resistance. They are clear expressions of inner alignment, communicated without hostility or fear. The ego is always in a state of tension, trying to prove, protect, or possess. Awareness relaxes the tension. It sees the temporary nature of thoughts and emotions and does not cling to them. It understands that control is an illusion and that love cannot be commanded or captured. Love flourishes not in the tightness of control, but in the freedom of allowing. In the absence of control, a deeper kind of trust emerges, not necessarily trust in the other person's actions, but trust in the intelligence of presence itself. You no longer need to manipulate outcomes because you are rooted in something deeper than the mind's projections. You become the space in which the relationship can breathe. Love is not possession, it is being. When love is seen as something to hold on to, something to own, it quickly becomes entangled with fear, attachment, and dependency. The moment love becomes a strategy to avoid loneliness or to secure emotional gratification, it ceases to be love and becomes a form of psychological need. Possession arises when the ego steps in and says, "You are mine," as if another human being could be reduced to a concept, a role, or an object. But the truth of love cannot be contained by ownership. Being is the state of pure presence. It is not defined by thought, nor is it limited by form. Love, in its truest sense, arises from that dimension. It does not seek to grasp or to control, because it is already whole. When two people meet from the depth of being, love flows freely, without conditions, without demands, without fear of loss. It is not something they do for each other. It is what they are in each other's presence. The ego confuses attachment with love. It says, "I cannot live without you." But what it really means is, without you, I feel incomplete. That is not love, it is dependency. True love does not say, "I need to make me whole." It says, "I see the wholeness in you because I have discovered it in myself." When being is the foundation, love is not given or taken. It simply radiates. It does not fluctuate based on mood or circumstance because it is not tied to form. In unconscious relationships, love is often transactional. One person gives affection or attention in exchange for emotional validation or security. The language of possession dominates. My partner, my husband, my wife, as though the other person were a personal belonging. This way of relating comes from fear, the fear that love can be lost, that someone else might take what one believes is theirs. Such fear leads to jealousy, control, and eventual suffering. But when love is rooted in being, there is no clinging. There is no resistance to the other's freedom. In fact, the other's freedom enhances the love, because it is not about keeping or capturing, it is about witnessing and sharing the present moment. Love becomes a spacious field in which both people can grow, evolve, and awaken, not a cage to keep someone fixed in place. Love that comes from being does not diminish when the other person changes or withdraws. It remains not as emotional intensity, but as a deep sense of presence. It sees beyond personality and temporary moods. It perceives the essence, the aliveness behind the form. In this way, love becomes a path of awakening. It invites both individuals to remain rooted in presence rather than lost in stories. This kind of love is rare in a world driven by egoic desire, but it is available to anyone who becomes still enough to notice the inner dimension of being. From that stillness, there is a natural recognition the other is not yours and you are not theirs. There is only this shared presence, this silent awareness in which both are held. The need to define or possess disappears. Even in moments of separation or loss, the love that arises from being does not end. Because it was never based on form, it does not die with form. The person may leave, the relationship may shift, but the field of love remains. It is not dependent on proximity, contact, or even communication. It is a timeless connection through the shared recognition of presence. When one no longer seeks to possess love, it becomes infinitely more powerful. It is no longer a flame that flickers with circumstance. It becomes the light of awareness itself. It illuminates not just the relationship, but every aspect of life. There is no more striving, no more bargaining, no more fear. There is only being, and from being, love flows. Conflict reveals unconscious patterns. What we often call a problem in a relationship is rarely about the surface situation. The deeper truth is that conflict acts as a mirror, reflecting back the unconscious emotional pain, beliefs, and identity structures that live beneath the surface of both individuals. The ego resists this reflection because it threatens the false identity it has created. But for those willing to observe rather than react, conflict becomes a portal to awareness. Most people enter relationships carrying unresolved wounds from the past. These wounds form part of the pain body, a field of accumulated emotional pain that seeks to perpetuate itself through drama and reactivity. When a situation arises that resembles a past hurt, the pain body awakens. A word, a look, a tone of voice becomes the spark that ignites an emotional storm. The mind immediately constructs a narrative to justify the feeling. They don't care about me. They always do this. I'm not enough. But these stories are not about the present moment. They are the voice of the past demanding recognition. The unconscious mind does not want to see itself. It wants to blame the other, to project its discomfort outward. Conflict offers an opportunity to reverse that pattern. When emotions are triggered and one chooses to pause rather than attack or retreat, something powerful begins to shift. Awareness steps in. The anger, the hurt, the frustration can be observed without becoming them. The inner space between stimulus and response becomes accessible. Within that space lies the chance to see the root of the reaction. Perhaps what seems like a partner being distant is touching a deeper fear of abandonment. Perhaps what seems like criticism is awakening a long-held belief of not being good enough. These inner wounds, when left unseen, act as filters through which every interaction is interpreted. Conflict brings them to the surface, not to destroy the relationship, but to heal the individual. Each trigger is a teacher. Each argument contains within it the seed of awakening if one is willing to stay present. This does not mean accepting harmful behavior or avoiding boundaries. It means using the discomfort as a signal to look within, to feel what is arising without immediately acting upon it. In that way, the emotional charge begins to dissolve. The pain body cannot survive the light of conscious awareness. It may flare up, it may resist, but if it is observed without feeding it, it loses power. In a conscious relationship, both individuals begin to recognize this pattern. They start to see conflict not as failure, but as a shared invitation to presence. Instead of escalating the drama, they ask, "What is this revealing in me?" This question shifts the energy. Instead of defending, there is curiosity. Instead of closing, there is openness. The space between them becomes less about right or wrong and more about seeing clearly. Often, what is needed in these moments is not a solution, but a presence that can hold the emotional energy without judgment. When one person is able to remain grounded in awareness, the reactive loop is broken. The other, even if momentarily lost in the pain body, may sense that stillness and begin to return to it. Presence is contagious. It softens the sharp edges of conflict and allows for deeper communication to emerge. Conflict, then, is not the enemy of love. It is the fire through which the impurities of unconsciousness are burned away. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also sacred. It brings to the surface what needs to be seen, felt, and released. It asks each person not to change the other, but to meet themselves fully. In doing so, the relationship transforms, not because the conflict disappears, but because it becomes a pathway to deeper awareness. Conscious relating begins within. Before you can truly meet another with presence and openness, you must first learn to meet yourself. Most relationships are reflections of the relationship one has with their own inner world. If there is self-rejection, neediness, or a deep sense of lack within, it will inevitably be projected onto the other. The external relationship becomes an unconscious attempt to resolve internal fragmentation. But no one outside can fill the void within. The moment you look to another to make you feel whole, the relationship is already burdened with expectation. To relate consciously means to bring awareness to your own inner landscape, to observe the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that arise without becoming entangled in them. It means to recognize when you are acting out of fear, when you are trying to control, when you are seeking validation. These patterns can only be seen from a space of stillness. Without that inner awareness, you remain caught in cycles of reaction, repeating old dynamics with new faces. Conscious relating begins with presence. Presence is not a mental concept, it is the felt sense of being here now. When you are present, you are no longer lost in thought or fantasy. You are grounded in what is. This state allows you to observe your inner movements without judgment. You begin to see how often the mind resists the present moment, how it clings to the past or fears the future. And in seeing that, a shift begins to occur. You become less identified with the story and more anchored in awareness. From this place, your interactions with others begin to change. You are no longer looking to them to complete a narrative. You are no longer trying to extract love or worth from the relationship. Instead, you bring love to the relationship. This love is not emotional dependency. It is the natural outflow of your own inner connection. You do not love the other to feel good about yourself. You love because it is what arises when you are present. When you are in unconscious relationship, there is always a subtle agenda at play. The other is expected to behave a certain way, to say certain things, to meet certain emotional needs, and when they do not, frustration or disappointment arises. This creates a cycle of blaming, defending, or withdrawing. The ego seeks to be right or to be seen as the victim. But when you begin the work within, those patterns start to loosen. You no longer demand perfection from the other because you have stopped demanding it from yourself. Inward attention creates outward clarity. As you become more intimate with your own inner world, you develop a deeper compassion for the experiences of others. You begin to see that their reactions and behaviors are also shaped by pain, by fear, by conditioning. This does not mean you tolerate everything or abandon boundaries. It means you relate from understanding rather than judgment. You see the human behind the behavior, and in doing so, you allow space for healing. Conscious relating is not a destination. It is a moment-to-moment practice. It asks you to stay awake even when it would be easier to fall into blame or defensiveness. It asks you to own your feelings, to take responsibility for your projections, to remain curious rather than reactive. This kind of relating can only emerge when you have first created an inner environment of honesty, presence, and acceptance. The deeper your connection to your own being, the less you will look to others for identity. You will not need constant affirmation because you are rooted in something beyond form. And from that stillness, you will be able to meet another not as a means to an end, but as a sacred reflection of the same awareness that lives within you. Presence is the foundation of true intimacy. In most relationships, what is called intimacy is often a mixture of physical closeness and emotional entanglement built upon roles, expectations, and unconscious needs. But true intimacy is not about proximity or emotional intensity. It is about the quality of awareness that you bring into each moment with another. When you are present, fully here without past or future clouding your perception, a deeper connection naturally emerges. It is not something you can create through effort. It arises when the noise of the mind quiets and space is made for what is. Presence means being fully attentive to what is happening now without trying to change it, fix it, or escape from it. It is the openness that allows both you and the other to be exactly as you are. In that space, the masks drop. There is no longer a need to impress, defend, or conform. There is just the stillness behind the words, the awareness behind the actions. In presence, the other is no longer perceived as a concept, my partner or my spouse, my friend, but as a living, breathing expression of consciousness, just as you are. True intimacy cannot arise when one or both people are identified with the mind. The mind brings history into every interaction. It remembers past grievances, projects future fears, and overlays every moment with its commentary. When two minds are relating, it is not two people who are meeting, but two stories. Each tries to convince the other of its version of reality. Each seeks to defend its identity. This dynamic creates distance, not closeness. But presence dissolves the story. It doesn't deny the past, nor does it ignore practical concerns. It simply places the attention where it truly belongs, here and now. From that space, communication changes. It becomes less about being right or being understood, and more about simply expressing what is real in the moment. Our words are no longer tools of manipulation or defense. They become gentle ripples on the surface of a much deeper silence. In presence, even silence itself becomes a form of connection. There is no awkwardness, no need to fill the space. The shared stillness becomes more intimate than any conversation. Eye contact held without a need to interpret, a touch given without expectation. These are the expressions of presence. They speak directly to the being beneath the surface, bypassing the mind entirely. This kind of intimacy does not require constant attention or effort. It is not something that fades with time or routine. It is always available because presence is always available. What blocks it is not the other person, nor the circumstances, but the identification with thought. The moment you believe your thoughts are more important than the now, intimacy is lost. But as soon as attention returns to this moment, the doorway reopens. Presence also brings awareness to the body, which plays a crucial role in intimacy. The body exists only in the now. When you are present, you are more attuned to sensation, to subtle energy, to the unspoken language between you and the other. There is a softness that enters the nervous system. Defenses lower, breath deepens, tension releases. The body becomes a vehicle for connection, not just a form. True intimacy is not the result of time spent together, shared experiences, or emotional declarations. It is the natural outcome of presence. You may be with someone for years and never truly know them if presence is absent. And you may sit with a stranger for a few minutes and feel a profound connection if presence is there. This is the mystery of being. It is beyond logic, beyond narrative, beyond desire. It is simple, yet infinitely deep.